Hello, my name is Jack Randall, and the article I chose to react to is Eating Christmas in the Kalahari by Richard Borshay Lee. I picked this article because it highlights how deeply cultural values and worldviews shape human interactions, even when intentions are good. What might look like kindness in one culture can be interpreted very differently in another. In this story, Lee, an anthropologist, writes out his experiences living among the Kangsan people in the Kalahari Desert. As Christmas approached, he wanted to show gratitude to the community for their hospitality by purchasing the largest, fattest ox he could find for a feast. To his surprise, instead of thanking him, the Kung mocked the ox, calling it thin, useless, and barely enough to feed anyone. Lee was confused and even hurt because from his perspective, the ox was obviously huge and should have been received with appreciation. However, when the feast arrived, the ox turned out to be large enough to feed everyone generously. Later, Lee learned that teasing was part of a cultural practice where the Kung downplay gifts and joke about game meat in order to prevent arrogance and preserve social equality. In short, they weren't insulting him to be rude, they were keeping him grounded and reinforcing the group's values of humility. To me, this story powerfully illustrates how worldview influences our interpretations of events. Lee saw generosity as something that should lead to public praise, which reflects a Western worldview that often places value on recognition and action. The Kung, on the other hand, lived in a society where survival depended heavily on cooperation and maintaining harmony. For them, praise could threaten group balance by making someone feel superior. So instead, they use playful insults as a way to ensure humility. This shows how the same act, bringing food to share, can mean very different things when filtered through different cultural worldviews. Lee saw it as a gift deserving gratitude. The Kung saw it as a moment to reinforce their core value of equality. One of the clearest examples of ethnocentrism in the article comes from Lee's expectation that his gift would bring him admiration and thanks. His assumption was rooted in Western cultural values, where generosity is often rewarded with recognition. Because of this, he originally viewed the Kung's reaction as rude and ungrateful, but in reality, their behavior was simply consistent with their cultural norms. By analyzing this situation, we can see how ethnocentrism, judging another's culture based on their own standards, limited Lee's understanding at first. Fortunately, through living with them and reflecting on the experience, he grew to see beyond his worldview. This story also made me reflect on how easy it is to think of my own cultural values as normal or better. In my society, public recognition and praise are often expected when someone does something generous or noteworthy. But this article challenged me to step back and think, what if those values of praise and individual recognition are not universal? The Kung worldview shows a completely different but equally logical approach, where modesty and keeping people humble are what keeps the group strong. This makes me question whether constant praise is always the best approach, or whether it sometimes fuels competition and pride in ways that can hurt relationships. For example, in my culture, it's totally normal to have big birthday parties where people bring gifts, sing, and show the person with compliments or attention. That's considered polite and celebratory. But for someone from a culture like the Kung, such an event might feel excessive or even create tension. If the person being celebrated is being singled out above the group, what seems like a joyful tradition to us could feel unbalanced or uncomfortable through another worldview. That comparison helped me realize that no tradition is inherently better. It all depends on the cultural lens. Reading this also made me think about how we can communicate more effectively with people from different backgrounds. I think the best practice is to approach cultural differences with humility and curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of assuming, it's important to ask questions and listen carefully and try to understand the values driving people's actions. For example, once Lee stopped being offended and began asking the Kong where they treated gifts this way, or why they treated gifts this way. He was able to learn that the teasing wasn't hostile. It was a vital practice and supported equality. That willingness to listen instead of jumping to conclusions is what made true intercultural understanding possible, and it's something we can all apply in real-world interactions. I've also had a personal experience to help me appreciate this lesson. Once I praised a friend's achievement, expecting them to feel proud and happy. Instead, they looked uncomfortable and downplayed their success. At the time, I was surprised, but later I learned that in their culture, humility is very important, and being praised in public can feel awkward or even boastful. Looking back, I realized how similar this is to Lee's experience. I realized, in both situations, people acted with best intentions, but because of cultural differences in worldview, the actions were received in unexpected ways. These moments remind me that even small interactions carry deep cultural meaning. In conclusion, the most important lesson I took from eating Christmas in the Kalahari is that our worldview has a major impact on how we interpret others' actions and words. What might seem logical or polite to me could carry very different meanings elsewhere. Moving forward, I want to approach intercultural interactions with openness and sensitivity, avoiding assumptions that my own norms are universal. By doing so, I can build more respectful and effective communication with people from a variety of different backgrounds.